officially dismissed. You guys come on in. There's 2 seats up here. I know everybody loves the front row. 2 seats over here. All right, I like it. Now we're going to get into Is Bob coming? Okay, bummer. All right, tonight we're going to be looking at the spiritual gifts. Hopefully, most of you have had an opportunity to take a spiritual gift test, even if you didn't do the one last week. Maybe you did one online, or maybe you've done one earlier in life and kind of conjure up and remember what those things were. 2 or 3 of you let me know that one of the web addresses that I had last week was incorrect, and I think the text cleared that up. It should have had a link on it.
Yeah.
Can anybody confirm that? And so that's corrected and should be up and functioning. So that's just good information to know. And what we're going to do tonight is look at those 4 big groups that we just casually mentioned last week, talk about their value to the church, and then we're going to spend a good bit of the last half of the class getting into some groups and talking through your spiritual gifts and whatnot. Everybody stare at Alan real quick.
Make it colder, Alan.
Hello, everyone.
Who wants it colder?
I don't want you to get hot.
Yeah. The me church is like, it's
Oh,
that's
yeah.
right. So if some of this is on the notes, again, if for those of you who might have come in later, if you need the notes for tonight, you can follow these instructions and get the form on your phone. But let me just cover real quick the 4 big areas as a reminder. There's truth-telling gifts. These include prophecy, teaching, discernment, knowledge, wisdom. And we included that thing called creative communication, which can be anything from drama to creative writing to sometimes worship leading in some of these areas. The next grouping is called leading and building gifts. This includes apostleship and church starting, a pastor. You can use the same word as shepherd. It's the same word in the Greek. Leadership, administration, and encouragement and exhortation. And then the third group is supporting and helping gifts, which would be service and helps, mercy, hospitality, giving, and craftsmanship. And the special ministry gifts would include evangelism, miracles, faith, prayer, and tongues, and the interpretation of tongues. And y'all recall last week, if you weren't here, I put evangelism in this category because it is the one spiritual gift that is primarily designed to be used outside of the church itself versus inside of the church. Now, there may be lost people in the church, but the gift, as far as it being exercised, is really more designed for reaching people who are away from God, far from God, don't know God. And so it's a little bit different than your normal truth-telling gift that would be used to edify, build up the church family itself. So now, given those 4 big categories, we're just going to unpack each one of those 4, and then we'll talk a little bit more about your gifting as it goes. By the way, is there anybody here that just doesn't have a clue what their spiritual gift is after last week and or having a week to get online? Maybe you haven't had a chance to do any of this. So everybody here has a clue. Okay, we'll figure this out. Sort of. Approximate. Like a hand grenade. Just get close enough. Don't do a lot of work. The truth-telling gifts, interestingly, in almost every spiritual gift listing in the Bible are the ones that are listed first. Don't know if that's showing preeminence to them or it's just something that says it's good to know truth. And this is things that would include, like I said, prophecy and teaching are often there at the top of that list in that point. This person or persons would be gifted with a God-given ability to be able to know and express God's truth, and having some way of understanding those important things. Now, without truth tellers in the church has a tendency to float and just kind of wander. And this is the group that helps keep the whole church grounded in the Word. And it's an important ministry, and it's going to be something we'll look at. It helps with spiritual growth. When you hear the phrase speaking the truth in love, that sounds like, okay, we're starting something about a spiritual gift. Then it says, we will in all things grow up into Him who is the head. So it's a matter of taking truth with the purpose of spiritual growth. Y'all can finish the phrase here on John 8:32. You shall know the truth, and the truth will do what? Okay, so that is an important ministry to make sure freedom is happening in the lives of people. They're hearing God's truth and then acting on it. And so let's look at a few of these values. Again, they should be somewhere on your notes. It keeps the whole church following after God's revealed will. And again, primarily truth tellers are going to be the people that are really strong in the Word. They study it, they love it, they get it, they want other people to understand it, they'll go extra mile on these things. But in addition to the revealed written Word, there is a capacity often with this same group to discern the non-written will of God, that is, what God is telling us to do as a group. And this is where I know we kind of poked a little bit at the test last week, not the gift of, but the test regarding discernment. It's like, are we hearing God? Are we going in the right direction? You know, every church ought to have the same basic stuff we're doing because the Bible's the foundation. But one church may start this ministry heading this direction, and another church may start a ministry going that direction. And it's a matter of discerning the will for that body and stepping out and doing that. Number 2, guard against error, heresy, and relativism. And it's important, again, to keep the church on the proper path. One of the things that I love about our church, but is also can be a challenge for any church, is how wide of a road do you allow for theology? We all know there is heresy on the far sides. But when you think about the bell curve, the majority is going to be kind of in the middle. Some churches really want a narrow bandwidth when it comes to their understanding of spiritual truths and the only interpretations given in Scripture. And the sad thing is, if you keep splitting those hairs, pretty much you're the only one left in the church. Just because, you know, if you yourself are the sole interpreter, at some point it's going to just be you. Now, on the other side of that, you can have it so broad that it means nothing. And there are churches that openly embrace this. We are not that church. And so we have always tried to allow what we would kind of call that middle ground, where there's clear biblical teaching on this, but there's some leeway on application or leeway on occasion even with interpretation. But if you're going to have that, you better make sure it's grounded in the Word, not in opinion. And I think that is a strength for our church. You know, some people think we may be too loose. Others still may say we're too tight, you know, depending on which group you're talking with. But it does help guard. Truth-telling gifts help guard against those really far, far extremes. Number 3, clarifies biblical standards for belief and behavior. One of the old doctrinal statements, you know, faith and practice is how it sometimes is worded. make sure that you understand the proper faith and practice in what you're doing. And it aids in worshiping God. And when it says worship God in spirit and in truth, it's not just my heart's right, I'm doing it the way God would want me to do it. And it's important if you're going to be leading in worship that you have both of those elements of, I like to call it, it's sort of like Wizard of Oz. What was the problem with the scarecrow? If I only had a brain, he didn't have truth. And the next guy is the Tin Man. And what did he lack? He lacked the heart and didn't have the spirit. And it takes both if you're going to do worship properly. And at times it might even take the courage of a lion to stand up and worship, depending on the context. So, but that's the basic value of gifts that are truth-telling gifts for the body of Christ. This can be anything from one-on-one disciplers, the smallest group possible, one-on-one, up to small group leaders, life group leaders, teaching, preaching, international ministries, you name it. It can be big, it can be small, but the value and purpose of the gift is the same. Pulling people back to what has God said, what do we need to know, how are we to live, how are things as they ought to be, and let's function in that category. Any quick questions on truth telling? If your gift happens to be in that group, anybody want to raise their hand on that? Okay, you be back here. All right. Thanks for telling the truth. We appreciate it.
What was the truth telling?
Like a lie detector test. We're going to find out who really has this gift.
I don't have any truth.
All right, let's look at the next one. The next general set of gifts. This is the gifts for leading and building up the church. When I think about this, maybe this can be helpful. If you're going to be doing a major construction project, I'm not talking about like, knocking out a wall and adding a window. I'm talking about like if you're building a high rise. You need to have the architects, and then you gotta have construction foremen. Two very different jobs. The truth-telling gifts are like the architect. This is how it ought to be. The construction foremen and managers and whatnot are those who lead and actually functionally build the building. And that's where this gifting kind of goes in. They take the truth from the truth tellers and say, all right, that's all fine and dandy. That's up in the cloud. Now let's get it down here and do something. Let's have church. And so they're going to bring it and be very practical about these truths that can kind of get lost up in the air somewhere if we're not careful. So keep those things in mind. Here's a general focusing on accomplishing goals, focusing on mobilizing people, and progressing forward together as a group. And they typically, if they're really good, can do all three at one time. The goal has to be done, but not at the expense of people. If we all make it to the top of the hill and we hate each other and we're ready to kill somebody, that was not a good trip to the top of the hill. Now, if all we do is sit at the bottom of the hill and we're supposed to be at the top, that's not good either. And this group helps move people from point A to point B in an organized but still maintaining good relationships manner. Does that make sense? So again, we look back here on some of these gifts. I know pastor, shepherd, church starting, leadership, administration, encouragement and exhortation. These are gifts that kind of help build things up and lead things and move things forward. One of the things, I know Garrett occasionally gets bumped into this, and I, over the years, have had people ask this often. It's like, why don't we have more small groups? We can have as many small groups as we have leaders. That's the bottom line. We can multiply this thing all day if we have leaders. But nothing happens without leadership gifts. And I mean nothing. The government doesn't work, military doesn't work, businesses don't work, families don't work. Nothing works unless there's somebody that says, hey, let's make this happen. And that's what leaders do. And so it's really important in church life to have leaders. A church that just, quote, proclaims the truth and that's it is not healthy. They have to have somebody say, that's good truth, now let's go do something with it and organize people in the right direction to accomplish those kind of things. So in Romans 12:8, it says, if your gift is leadership, then lead or govern diligently. Get after it. If this is your gifting, you need to really understand there is a diligence required to manage people in the right direction. So some of the values that would fall in this category is they help move the church forward in fulfilling God's redemptive plan. It's just kind of kingdom advancement. They balance truth-telling with action. It's kind of I'm pretty sure as pastoral and teaching as the Apostle James was, when you read his letter, he's like, you got to be a doer of the word. If all you do is hear, that's not enough. And this is kind of that theme that comes out in what's going on here. It also does a really good job of combining both relational aspects of the church with really practical ministries. Again, we need to get there as a group and accomplish what needs to be done. So, any questions on leading and building up the church gifts? Okay, let's keep rolling. Next group is the supporting and helping gifts: service, helps, mercy, hospitality, giving, craftsmanship. In 1 Peter chapter, I think it's 4, verse 11, it says, if anyone speaks, he should do it as the one speaking the very words of God. That's speaking gifts. If anyone serves, he should do it with the strength God provides, so that in all things God may be praised. This is the service-oriented gifts. I don't know if you've thought much about how did practical things get done with Jesus and his little band of 12. I know enough to know you get 12 men just wandering aimlessly across the landscape is probably a mess. I mean, they're probably not thinking about cooking and taking baths and washing clothes and whatever. I mean, it's just, you can almost just see these guys like, they don't smell that bad. Hey, come on, And, I mean, hey, have a little humor there with Jesus. But there is a group that is often overlooked or just simply not very much is known about them. Most of these were women, but in Luke 8, verses 1 through 3, let me read this to you. It says, after this, Jesus traveled about from one town and village to another, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom of God. The 12 were with him. It's like, oh, this sounds normal. And also some women who had been cured of evil spirits and diseases, Mary called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had come out, Joanna, the wife of Chuza, the manager of Herod's household, Susanna, and then it says, and many others. These women were helping to support them out of their own means. They were not front people. They were not in the speaking role. They were not in the leading role. They were in full-on support role to make sure that the mission could be accomplished. And they were helping fund this, the gift of giving. They were doing lots of hospitality, lots of serving and helps. And I just think that's a really, much needed thing that's just not thought much about. Now this is totally unrelated. This, I guess, is my truth-telling gift jumping out of my mouth. Can't help it. This is the only time Mary Magdalene is really described about her life, her background. It drives me nuts that in most Catholic traditions and even through history, Baptist tradition, she's always called a prostitute. She's never, ever referred to as a prostitute. She was demonized, but never says anything about her moral lifestyle. And so, but she had been cured of these things and was now a faithful servant, which is worth noting, that someone can have a horrible past and make a huge impact for the kingdom. And who was the first eyewitness, I might add? Mary, to the resurrected Jesus. So, just a little something tucked away. Now, let's get back to our construction. Architect, got all the construction managers. Who actually builds the building? A whole bunch of people at minimum wage or just a hair above. Okay? You got guys hammering nails and jackhammering and pouring concrete and laying brick and doing the plumbing. They're the ones doing the building. Without them, there would be no building. So, how important is their job? It's pretty important. And good people at the manager level, the leading and helping or leading and encouraging area, are able to build those teams so that they enjoy doing that kind of work and can see that it's productive and is helping move the ball down the field. So these are really important gifts. It's kind of funny in the book of Proverbs, I believe it's chapter 6, it says, go and look at the ant. They're pretty amazing little things. And it describes ants. They're diligent. They're storing things up. They're busy. If you've ever been by an ant pile, don't get near a fire ant pile. But if you've ever been around ants, they're just always on the move, collecting and gathering stuff. The other thing that's crazy about ants, they carry so much more than their own weight. They're the littlest ones think, they can't do anything. They're over there dragging off a grasshopper, 3 of them got it on its back and hauling it off. It's kind of like, servants have this divine capacity to have strength that is beyond measure on certain areas. When there are some projects to be done, and I'll just pick on Ken Fern as an example, the husband of Sue back here. That guy's like the Energizer Bunny. And you're just like, he's the ant carrying like 15 times his weight and his load, and everyone else is kind of staring going, man, this one chair is heavy, and he's like grabbing a whole stack and walking off with him. And you're like, how did he do that? Spiritual gifting. We'll call it that. But now, let's look at the value of these gifts. They provide necessary workers to accomplish ministry. Now, if you're a farmer, back in the day, you needed an animal to help provide some extra power for pulling the plow. Servants are the people power of the church. They step up and do the hard, sometimes sweaty, sometimes lowly work that no one else really wants to do. And it includes what we all should have as a servant's heart that Jesus values highly. The greatest among you should be the servant. But it also is just people who really are content to be behind the scenes and making things happen. And, if you don't think much about this, sometimes when we're having like a meal or something like that, and after it's over, just kind of start watching who puts up chairs, who puts up tables, who made sure the kitchen's clean. And all of a sudden you look around and go, that didn't just happen. Somebody stepped up and did it. It's pretty cool. Another thing they are the hands and feet of Jesus to others. And I think that's important to see it that way. There are times they are doing something so tangible, but it has a spiritual element to it. Somebody's sick, and a meal is prepared and brought to them for that sick family or incapacitated family, whatever, that is like a gift from Jesus to them. And it's seen as a gift in that way. And it's a good thing, it's a beautiful thing. They will bless many people with beneficial acts of love. Again, these can be very simple things, gifts, friendships, projects that are started and actually finished. I might add. There's a gift of craftsmanship that never quite gets off the ground, and then there's the guys, ladies that help get it done. And here's a very important one, this last one, is they strengthen the church reputation in the community. It's awful hard to argue at a church that has got a lot of people serving in capacities where no one else wants to do it. We started years ago, that's how we got into the corn grilling business at the fall festival. Nobody else in town wanted to touch that. And so we stepped up, and we've done it for several years in a row now. But now it is something that is a big part of a ministry that we do. And, but it just strengthens the church's reputation. It's, again, hard to be hostile. I know I'm being recorded, but a few weeks back when we had some of our Middle Eastern friends here, and we were able to provide them with some very needed supplies, with food, with diapers, with English lessons, with all these kinds of things. A group of people that normally would be terrified of stepping in a Christian church, after about a day and a half realized these people love us and serve us and are open-handed toward us. Totally changed their attitude about Christians. And now there are possibilities for some good conversations because there's some credibility that's been built in by servants, not by truth tellers, but by servants who led the way first. Any questions comments on this one? Okay. Gifts of special ministries. The best way I know to describe this is it's kind of like the special teams in football or soccer or whatever. You know, when you've got a certain group that there's normal people that are just your typical offense, defense, but at certain key moments in the game, you need a particular trick play, and there's just somebody knows how to do it like nobody else can do it. And I remember when I was in martial arts, everybody wanted to do when do I get to be Chuck Norris? It's like a long time later, let's learn how to kick, and let's learn how to block, and let's learn how to, let's learn the basics. But once you have the basics, here's a little known fact in martial arts. About 85% of all fighting that you'll see is learned in your first 2 belts, white belt, yellow belt. But everybody wants to do that jumping, spinning, hook kick. That is so high up in the thing that very few people can actually do it and do it well. Well, think of that as kind of like the special gifts ministry thing. It's just something that not everybody can do, and when it's needed, it's needed. But most of the church operates just on bread and butter, blocking and tackling, basic stuff as it moves forward. Now, on this one, let me just say this a little bit that's, I think, accurate. The other 3 categories, you can somewhat guarantee they're going to be happening on pretty regularly. People are going to be serving. People are going to be leading and encouraging. People are going to be truth-telling. That's kind of like normal church ministry stuff. When it comes to this area, it is dependent way more on divine opportunities that God presents. You can't make up miracles. I don't think you can. You can't force an evangelistic opportunity. Now you can try, but I promise you it'll probably backfire on you. Some of these kinds of gifts are just people have to be really sensitive, and then you may think, they're just a bump on the log around here. Then all of a sudden, that one Sunday, they step up and blow something up, and or a ministry situation, you kind of go, where did they get that? And then they sit back down, and they're like, that was it. And then we want to make a hero out of them because they did something sensational, when in reality, all they did was operate in their gift, and they expressed grace in a very unique opportunity. And then they had, hopefully, the sense to step back out and not make it about them anymore. That's a good sign of the maturity of where these gifts are used. These gifts aren't any better or any lesser than any of the other gifts. So one of the things value-wise, number one, is they express God's sovereign power in difficult situations. Sometimes these are desperate matters, desperate situations, dire health situations, relationship things are bad, so on and so forth. But they're able to say show God's power. Directed to believers, they can help persuade and convince believers of God's goodness and power. Now, this is one of those things that people with the gift of prayer, I'll be the first to admit that there was a time in my life I was like, if all those people have a gift of prayer, they should go to the hospital. Walk around and open every door and just pray for everybody and everybody be healed, right? But it doesn't work that way. Does anybody else ever think that?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Al.
I tried it, and it just
It handed you the bedpan on the way out. But it's important to express these gifts in a way that bring grace to people around us. And believers need to be encouraged by people who know how to pray powerfully. It is an encouragement. If someone prays for me and I know they really have a genuine gift of prayer, I don't know what it is, but it does change something. And it's just, you see the power and the goodness of God. Now, for the unbeliever operating these gifts, ideally they are pointing people to Jesus. They're going, what just happened? Or like with the gift of evangelism, all of a sudden they're thinking about or hearing about something they never had thought before, but it can point them towards the Lord, and it can, the last one here is create unique opportunities for worship. It's okay to be excited and have a moment of clap if somebody gets healed or someone gets delivered, or if a big, everybody's been praying for something and the prayer gets answered. That's a great time to actually worship instead of going, no, we don't, better not get too excited. It's like, no, celebrate, rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn, and kind of work through these things. So anyway, any questions on the special ministry gifts? All right, we're doing good. I want us to get, I don't know if we can do this, we might can pull it off this way, is getting groups of about, since there's a lot of 5 and 6s that are sort of built in, 4, 5, 6 on the upper end. I need us in groups, and we're just going to talk through some things quickly. So let's make some groups. Leaders, organize this thing. Yeah, you can move your chairs. Feel free to move the chairs around.
All of your personal stuff is going around.
I'll turn it off. I'm about to turn it off. I'm not Okay, now that we're You guys can't count on the back row, can you? God bless you.
Okay.
15 people.
Oh, we'll figure it out.
Now, what your notes should have on your phone is all of these gifts and a little bit of a description. Let me walk you through what these how a description works. It tells you, like, the first thing that's listed is a basic definition of that gift. Just basic stuff. And then it talks about common distinctives. Now, these are common. These are not an exhaustive list. They're not guaranteed every single time in every single case, but these are generalities that seem to be very true. So it will then give a biblical basis, and later on, if you find yourself gifted in one of these areas, go and look and study these biblical areas and maybe see people who operated that way or some instruction about how to operate that way. The third thing is actually quite important. It is the caution. What is not often taught in gift studies is every single spiritual gift has a dark side. It's a blind spot. It's the thing that you think your gift is so awesome and everyone else goes, only when it's used well, and then it's horrible. But every gift has things you need to be careful about. For example, we always hear about the prophet. Some people, I'm just telling the truth. Well, you're doing it in a really mean way. And prophets can be so blunt, it's like they're just using paint remover every time they're talking to people. And it's not ministry at that point. It's just wounding people in Jesus' name. That's the dark side of that gift. The good side of that gift is they may see what the real issues are, and they may need to speak directly, but they need to speak the truth in love. So that's one minor example of what some of these things can be. And then the last thing in that list describes some potential ministry outlets for operating in this gift. Some of you may say, gosh, I've got the gift of helps, what can I do? Or I've got the gift of teaching, what should I do? It will outline some of these things and give you an opportunity to do that. So first time around your circle, I'm going to turn this thing off now so we're not recording this for